An Immram is a class of old Irish tales concerning a hero's sea journey to the other world, written in the Christian era and essentially Christian in aspect. They preserve elements of Irish mythology. The immrama are identifiable by the focus on the exploits of the heroes during the search for the other world, located in these cases in the islands far to the west of Ireland. The hero sets out on his voyage for the sake of adventure to fulfill his destiny, and generally stops on other fantastic islands before reaching his destination. He may or may not be able to return home again. Definition: the immrama are generally confused with the similar Irish genre, the etray or adventure. Both types of story involve a hero's journey to an otherworld, whether a Christian paradise, a fairyland, the land of the gods, or a utopia. They are distinguished by date. Etray are older, dating from the 7th century, while the earliest Immram dates only to the 8th century. David Dumville argues that the immrama include more Christian thinking than the more pagan genre of etray, and that, whereas the purpose of the etray is to enhance understanding of the old gods and the land in which they live, in an Immram these pagan elements occur as a challenge to the hero's faith. In an etray, the protagonist only ever goes to one location and may arrive in the other world with no explanation of the journey, whereas in an Immram the hero always has multiple adventures on several islands. Stories. Originally there were 7 officially recognized Immram listed in a list of ancient texts. Of those 7, only 3 survive: the voyage of Maelduin, the voyage of the Uichora, and the voyage of Snegus and Macregla. The voyage of Bran is classified in these same lists as an etray, though it also contains the essential elements of the immrama. The later Latin voyage of St. Brendan also contains a voyage across the sea to various otherworldly islands. Origins. Immram were first recorded as early as the 7th century by monks and scholars who fled continental Europe before the barbarian invaders of the 5th century. These monks carried the learning of Western Europe and became the vanguard of the Christianizing of Europe. On this account it is expected that Immram have their origins in pre-existing Christian voyage literature, pre-existing Celtic legends, or classical stories the monks would have known. The origins of these stories are attributed to 3 sources of pre-existing stories: Irish myths, Christian genres, and classic stories. The otherworld in the voyage of Bran is a distinctly Celtic feature, but this is easily overlooked because the concept of the Christian paradise and the British and Irish otherworld are closely related. This difference is highlighted in the difference between sinless and sexless in the native and Christian mindset. In the existing translation, where an author may have turned the Isle of Woman into a chaste society with some difficulty. Such an example was with a passage that described a man and woman playing under a bush without sin or blame. This passage, in light of several others, emphasizes a Christian effort to create a sinless and sexless otherworld. Immrama may have borrowed heavily from pre-existing Christian genres, such as the Sancti Vitae, the Peregrinatio, and the Vision Tales. As early as the 5th century, Irish monks would go on a pilgrimage, a peregrination, sailing from island to island seeking isolation, where they would meditate and purge themselves of the sins. The source of inspiration behind the Immram may also be the Christian punishment of sending people adrift for their crimes to be judged by God. Perhaps the largest piece of evidence that Immram are Christian works is that the characters in the story are generally wandering priests, monks, and nuns, or at least related to them. One of the first Celticists, Heinrich Zimmermann, attempted to link the Immram with the Aeneid and the Odyssey. Some of the parallels they make are between the immortal women in the tales who bestow immortality on the lovers for the time they remain with them, and the giant sheep on islands in both stories. These parallels have since been debunked by William Flint Thrall. On top of the literary and mythological precedents, some scholars have argued that the Immrama may be exaggerated retelling of historical voyages. The early Irish, particularly monks, were certainly far-travelled, reaching the Orkney, Shetland, Faroe Islands at an early date and perhaps even reaching Iceland. Some places and things referenced in the Immrama and the Brendan tale have been associated with real islands and real things. For instance, Brendan's crystal pillar has been suggested to refer to an iceberg. Influence. Irish author C.S. Lewis's The Voyage of the Dawn Treader is sometimes described as a modern Immram. The popularity of the voyage of St. Brendan inspired Tim Severin to undertake a voyage using 5th century technology to demonstrate that the early Irish could have made it as far as North America. Australian author Patrick Holland's novel Navigation is a 21st century Immram that reimagines the Brendan voyage. It accretes contradictory and repetitive episodes to create the impression of an unredacted collection of medieval texts. Anatole France satirized the Immram genre in the early part of his 1908 Penguin Island.